I think we'll make a start. The counter stopped ticking upwards. Welcome to what is the final in a 2.5-year run of these AFRICAP webinars. So thank you very much for coming. My name is Richard King. I'm based in the Environment and Society Programme at Chatham House, which is an independent international affairs policy institute based in London. And the reason you're seeing my face today is because as part of the AFRICAP programme, we have been co-hosting two fellows in our academy programme, which I'll say a few words about later, and they are going to be able to present us today. And they come to us from partner AFRICAP institutes. But before we get into the content of today's session, just a few housekeeping slides. So as attendees, your audio and video has been disabled. If you'd like to ask any questions, which I hope you will, please post them in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll get to those after the presentations. And if you have any general questions or comments or any technical issues, then feel free to use the general chat facility. This session is on the record and we are recording it, just for your information. So for anyone who's managed to avoid AFRICAP for the last 2.5 years, just to give a very brief introduction to the programme, the AFRICAP stands for Agricultural and Food System Resilience, Increasing Capacity and Advising Policy. And it's been a major 4-year programme of work with the aim of making agriculture and food production in sub-Saharan Africa more productive, more sustainable, more resilient to climate change. And it's a large consortium of organisations involved, headed up by the University of Leeds in the UK, but working in partnership with local organisations and governments in our 4 focal countries, which are Malawi, South Africa, Tanzania and Zambia. And the idea is really to create an evidence base to support new country-specific policies that are, as I say, sustainable, resilient, climate smart. There are 4 kind of core themes to the AFRICAP project: food systems research, climate smart development pathways, then sort of bringing those into policy design and implementation. And a key component is also training and capacity building. And the project is funded by the UK Research and Innovation Global Challenges Research Fund. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And I think it's broadly in that capacity building remit that we're able to bring you today's webinar, because it is the product of, as I said, this fellowship that we've been hosting at Chatham House with 2 of our partner organisations, where they have been spending 3 to 6 months with us, unfortunately virtually on this occasion, although last year we were able to do it in person with 2 other partners, and they've been part of our Queen Elizabeth II Academy for Leadership in International Affairs programme, where the idea is that they develop a research project, develop leadership skills and build a sort of critical understanding of international affairs issues in connection with other fellows from around the world who join us for up to a year. So our 2 presenters have been involved in that programme, so I'm just going to move straight to introducing them. First, we have Agatha Kiama, who is a researcher with the Economic and Social Research Foundation of Tanzania. And Agatha's job involves providing direct support to the regional country node in implementing the AFRICAP programme. She has a master's degree in climate change and sustainable development, and also a degree in geography and environmental studies, both from the University of Dar es Salaam. And Agatha is going to talk to us today about some research on learning alliances and how they can best be used as a tool to build agricultural resilience. After Agatha has spoken, we will move on to our other fellow, who is Ndumiso Mazibuko, who joins us as the Senior Economist at the National and Agricultural Marketing Council of South Africa, where he's the Senior Economist in Statutory Measures Division, and he leads their livestock portfolio. Ndumiso has a PhD in agricultural economics, and he's going to be speaking to us about his work on Southern African food systems in the light of climate change and COVID-19 impacts. And then after Agatha and Ndumiso have both presented, we're very fortunate to be joined by a very distinguished discussant, Honorary Sindiso Ngwenya, who is the former Secretary General of the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, or COMESA. He's a Zimbabwean economist and a transport expert. And he also served as the chairperson of the Board of Governors for FANRAPAN, Food, Agricultural and Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network, who are our key Pan-African partner within the AFRICAP programme. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand straight over to Agatha to share her presentation with us. Agatha, the floor is yours.
Hi, greetings everyone. My name is Agatha. I work at Economic and Social Research Foundation based at Dar es Salaam, and it's a country node hosting the AFRICAP program. And ESRF is a think tank that is basically dealing with issues relating to research and providing evidence to support economic management processes in Tanzania. Last year, I had a privilege to be one of the people who attended the Chatham House Fellowship from Tanzania under Africa project. And as part of the fellowship, I had an opportunity to had a write-up on had a write-up on the role of learning alliances in upscaling climate smart agriculture in Tanzania. So I'll be talking on issues relating to how African countries can upscale agriculture and improve food security and system using learning alliances. So I'll be looking at the opportunities, challenges, as well as best practices for using learning alliances as a way of upscaling agriculture. So as the global still continue to face challenges, many challenges, including increase of population, as well as COVID-19 as it is right now. So climate change is one among the challenges that face and affect agriculture and the food system in Tanzania. As a way of dealing with such challenges, Tanzania and the Minister of Agriculture launched a climate resilient plan that was launched in 2014, and it was to act up to 2019, which serves as a roadmap for stakeholders to address challenges relating to climate change. And as one of its priorities was to uptake climate smart agriculture. And the best way to advocate and accelerate the uptake of climate smart agriculture has been through different technologies, such as establishing voluntary and action-oriented multi-stakeholder platforms, to which we are referring to now as a learning alliance. So basically what a learning alliance is a multi-stakeholder, it's a multi-stakeholder platform which is established to upspeed the process of identification, development, and scaling up of innovation. So if those are done, basically they would sustain climate change adaptation and action and foster ways of addressing such challenges and gaps. So learning alliances are not new terms. They have been there since late 1980s, and they have been established for different purposes, including, so they have been working under different discourse including under health discourse, under economic, social, and now under climate change, such alliances are used for different purposes. So learning alliances normally are flexible and they take different approaches. So what we'll be looking basically today is the approach that learning alliances has taken from global level to district level, that is the subnational level. So yes, if you look at this diagram here, you see that learning alliances are not new things, and they've been used, as I said, from early 1980s and at different levels. That at the global level, we have the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, which covers the whole world, and anyone can be a member of it. The main objective of the alliance is to enable at least 5 million farmers around the world to practice climate smart agriculture as a way of improving food security and nutrition. Again, if you look at that diagram, also we have the regional. At the regional level, we have African Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance, which is known as ACSA. This is the learning alliance which caters for African Union countries, with its member being private sector, civil society, and non-state players, with the main objective of facilitating exchange of learning among the members and understanding in a group on how to harmonize various climate change and agriculture program being undertaken in African countries. Also, from the regional level, we have the sub-regional level, that is East African Climate Smart Agriculture Platform, which is at the national government, regional economic or communities and research. And its members being countries from Burundi, Ethiopia, African, and the South Sudan, and Uganda, with the main objective of promoting and upscaling climate smart agriculture and the increased productivity and income of its people. So again, at the sub-regional level, we have West African Climate Smart Agriculture, which is known as the WACSA. This one caters for countries like Benin, Burkina Faso, and Sierra Leone and Togo. Its main objective is to support implementation of climate framework for action of climate smart agriculture and West African countries. So basically, these are the West African countries. So again, we have the SACSA, which is the South African Climate Smart Agriculture, which caters across SADC member state countries, also with the aim of reaching at least 6 million small-scale holder farmers to practice climate smart agriculture in Africa. Yes, so what are the opportunities that comes with the learning alliances, as well as challenges and best practices? So when you look at the opportunities, that since the learning alliance brings in different expertise, so it benefits social cycles and network associated with their members. So members get a chance to be together and utilize their expertise, since they normally come from different expertise. So it allows them to have a wider room of discussing multi issues. Again, learning alliances can best benefit from other learning alliances that have been established. For this case is that the learning alliance at the district level can benefit from other learning alliances from national, subnational, as well as from the global level, and seeing what others are practicing and put into practice into their level. So learning alliances are best for knowledge sharing. Is that when members come together, they get a chance to share knowledge of what they know. Again, learning alliances direct or indirectly contribute to policy and the country strategies, since they operate from the local level. So it's a chance for them to feed in their ideas that could best be kept or added to policies and strategies. Taking a good example here in Tanzania, we have learning alliances at the local level. That is we have the Kilolo, we have the Lushoto, as well as the Muheza Learning Alliance, which is to be established. So if the members have a chance to come together and discuss issues that are seen to be best to be added into national policies and strategies, that is well safe at the Learning Alliance. For example, right now, Tanzania is reviewing the agricultural resilient plan, as well as national climate strategy. So at the local level, where there is a learning alliance, members get a chance to feed in their best ideas to the newly strategy or policy. So learning alliances can also be used as a best tool for disseminating climate smart agriculture best practices, since there are different projects that are being implemented in the learning alliances. So they do cater for all the nation to disseminate what have been practiced to the nation to know what is really going on. So looking at the challenges, what are the challenges that are really facing learning alliances? Normally, learning alliances do take a long time from starting off it up to where it can stand as a learning alliance. So during the process, a lot could happen. Members could lose interest, or some could be transferred to other areas, and so many things. So normally the process it takes quite a long time. Also, if it happens that there is a poor communication among members of the Learning Alliance, that could limit the knowledge sharing, since it becomes difficult for members to share their ideas if there is poor communication. Also, there is this tendency of relying highly from funds from donors. So this has been a challenge to many of the learning alliances that have been established already. They normally lack capacity to at least find ways to develop their own fund, hence relying on funds from donors. So if anything happens, like right now that the issue of COVID-19 has happened and a lot of budgets have been cut from developing partners. So if our learning alliance is really depending on funds from donor, it becomes a problem for it to continue running. And also, if the learning alliance has few number of people, that if it sets boundaries of people who can join in the team of the Learning Alliance, it could also limit outreach of or dissemination of its practice to other areas and to other people. And if it happens that there is a poor leadership in a Learning Alliance, it becomes a problem for the whole learning process. And this has happened in other learning alliances, and it led to their downfall, since the leaders could not connect ideas or could not connect the learning alliance to the higher level. If it's at local level, the leaders could not find initiatives to bring its people together. It becomes a problem for them to stand long. So what are the best practices for learning alliances for it to stand? So as it is, a learning process requires stakeholders to be brought together. So before engaging with all stakeholders, it's necessary to have a core group of people, like a group of 5 people with common interests who know what is to be done in the whole process of learning to guide others. And also by it's necessary, or it's very important to conduct the stakeholders analysis to know which members are brought in, to know what contribution each member will bring in to the Learning Alliance, and is a way of creating ownership of all members. So it's a necessary thing to do stakeholders analysis before starting a Learning Alliance. Also, when setting up a Learning Alliance, it is important to consider how different levels of people could relate to one another, or how one member of a platform can relate to one another. So it's an important role in coordinating engagement, policy decision-making between local communities, district, and the national level. So also when setting up a Learning Alliance, it is really important to be realistic in terms of flexibility and time, as well as I said before, as the process takes a long time, so it's really good to be flexible where necessary. So also in establishing a Learning Alliance, it's very important to have meetings more often, since it gives direction and focus of Learning Alliance. It brings in different new ideas and the way forward of what is to be conducted in the Learning Alliance. So in order to achieve their intended goals, Learning Alliances need to be to identify capacity gaps, that if any of its member is lacking certain capacity, it is important to bring in those people who can at least improve their capacity, and seek for opportunities for capacity to be built from anywhere that can be achieved. So also as a way of minimizing the problem of relying on funds from donors, it is really important that the process for acquiring funds, Learning Alliances need to be visible, active, and identified as key stakeholders, institutions at district level, and it demonstrate the value of Learning Alliances at development initiative during the scoping and the design phase. Also, members could be wise enough to develop different activities that could bring in funding instead of relying on funds from donor. So a Learning Alliance can serve wider purpose than information sharing. It can become a platform for action, for co-designing and implementation of research, dissemination and use, and also monitoring and evaluation of learning process. And result is critical to understanding their impact, success, and failure, to stimulate learning of process and ways forward to upscale agriculture resilience. So that's the end of my presentation, and I would also love to bring to your attention that as part of AFRICAP, I'll be supporting the establishment of newly Learning Alliance that is to be established in Muheza, Tanzania, and it's about to start this August. So that Learning Alliance will be established with direct companion from Tanzania Climate Smart Agriculture, who are the pioneers of climate smart agriculture issues in Tanzania. And they are also member of the global Climate Smart Agriculture Learning Alliance. So I will be part of the team in supporting the whole process and Africa project, also as a Chatham House fellow. And thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Agatha. Lots of very useful practical tips in there. If anyone does have any questions for Agatha, remember to use the Q&A function in Zoom. But we will carry on with our program, and I'll hand straight over to Ndumiso.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Ndumiso here. from the National Cultural Marketing Council, and also AFRICAP fellow with Chatham House. So today I'm going to be giving a presentation on the work that I'm currently busy with on building equitable, resilient, and better food systems in Southern Africa, taking into consideration the issue of climate change and COVID-19. So some of the colleagues may be aware that 2 weeks ago we also had discussions around this topic, where we also invited a couple of experts to help us unpack this topic and guide us in terms of what could be the way forward in building equitable and resilient and better food systems. So in this slide, I'm highlighting my presentation outline, or I'll give the background around this work, the questions which we are seeking to address, and issues around COVID-19 and food security, and then looking at issues around food security in Africa and then food systems in Africa, and then give concluding remarks on the outcomes of some of the work, especially looking also at the outcomes which came out in the last discussion we had around this particular topic. Yes, so colleagues, in terms of the background, so we know that agriculture plays a critical role in terms of eradicating hunger, poverty, and providing food security and nutrition, especially in Africa, and also improving the livelihoods of many of the households in Africa. So we've seen that it's also important in protecting the environment and achieving sustainable development in Africa. We've seen that in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, there's been growing challenges in feeding a growing population, which is becoming more and more urbanized. Also, while there's also been challenges in addressing the issues of household incomes for rural producers that have been, these have been also major debates over the years in saying, how do we work towards addressing these challenges that we are facing as the African continent. We also know that developing climate smart agriculture food systems in sub-Saharan Africa is one of the preconditions of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have to work together as the continent to making sure that we meet these preconditions for sub-Saharan Africa. So the work that we are concluding looks at how can we address questions around looking at what is the food security and nutrition status of Southern Africa, looking at saying how have staple food markets in Southern Africa been disrupted by issues around climate change, and more recently by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're also looking at saying what policy measures are required to provide for food systems that are able to produce enough and nutritionally sufficient food for the needs of their population. And also looking at saying, how can we build better food systems in order to make sure that they are equitable, resilient to issues around climate change and future shocks around your pandemics. So in terms of literature which is available, it currently estimates that around 690 million people are hungry in the world, and that being equitable to about 8.9% of the world population. And in terms of this has been up by 10 million people in terms of the last year, and by nearly 60 million people over the past 5 years. And then if you look at what current estimates are saying, is that because of the COVID, if you look at the COVID-19 scenario, about 30 million more people may face hunger in 2030. Looking at the effect of the pandemic. And also this reveals that the global food security issue is even of a much more bigger pandemic than the one we are currently facing. So greater inequality in access of food is mostly responsible for the observed differences in the world. So in terms of current figures, they are indicating that the world is currently not on track to achieving the zero hunger by 2030. And then if recent trends continue, we will be seeing a much more increase in terms of what's happening in terms of the number of people affected by hunger. This is expected to surpass the 840 million mark by 2030, or in terms of percentage from 9.8% of the world population. Furthermore, in terms of this crisis that is we are facing, the issue of climate vulnerability and frequent climate extremes is linked to climate change, may also affect this the issue of food security status in the world even more. So this is why it's critical to look at how can we build equitable, resilient, and better food systems in the world, and also in looking more in terms of this work more specifically in Southern Africa. This taking a deeper look into the nutrition issues around food security, issues around climate change, and issues around food systems in Southern Africa, and how practitioners and policymakers can build more equitable and resilient and better food systems for the future. So also according to the Sophia report of 2021, it highlights that about 21% of the population was facing hunger in Africa in 2020. And then more than double of the proportion, this is more than double of the proportion of any other region in the world. It also highlights that about 46 million more people than in 2019, about 46 million more people more than in 2019, which is more than one third of the are under nutrition, are living in Africa. And because of COVID-19, what we are also seeing, especially looking at the work that has been done by Academia 2063, highlights that because of COVID-19, prices of certain staple foods have increased in terms of staple food products over the recent times because of COVID-19. And then in some countries in Southern Africa, prices went down. This is if you're looking at countries which are relying mainly on regional trade in terms of some of their their staple food. So looking at the fact that borders were closed and some countries were unable to move out some of the staple food, so some of those countries resulted in a surplus of staple food, which then pushed the food prices of those particular products down. So in terms of this table, we are highlighting that the prevalence of food insecurity at moderate and several level, it has been increasing over the years, where if you look at the percentage of severe food insecurity in Southern Africa, it was sitting at around 18.9% in 2014. And then in 2020, it's sitting at around 22.7%. So this highlights that current food systems are not able to address the issue of food insecurity in Southern Africa, as we see the increase in the percentage. And then we're also seeing that in terms of affordability of food security and nutrition in Southern Africa, between 2013 2017 and 2019, there's been a percentage change of around 2.1%, where we are, in terms of the figures from the Sophia report of 2021, the cost of nutritious and healthy diet in per day is currently costs about 4.07 cents dollar per day, $4.07 per day. So this highlights that the cost of this is very much high if you compare to the poverty line of $2.5 per day. So this it clearly indicates that the affordability of nutritious food in South Africa is still very much high. However, if you look at that cost, it's a bit lower when you compare to the average of Africa. However, also a bit high if you compare to the average of the world. So in terms of food systems in Southern Africa, they highlight that the current food systems, the background and the work and literature highlights that the current food systems in Southern Africa are currently not delivering in terms of the food security needs of the population of Southern Africa. Furthermore, current food systems in Southern Africa were not, even before COVID-19, delivering on the nutrition needs and food security needs of Southern Africa. And furthermore to this, we are seeing that food production under the current system is also highly vulnerable to climate shocks, where we've seen that in terms of climate shocks in a number of Southern Africa countries, where they've been subjected to droughts and your El Ninos, this has affected the capability of those countries to produce for a food secure nation, or also for making sure that households are food secure. Furthermore, this highlights that the current policies in some of these countries have failed to provide the necessary investment into agriculture, which will be critical in making sure that we are building more resilient food systems to issues around climate shocks. And then it also highlights that the current and future climate shocks will continue to disrupt food systems without us working towards building resilient food systems in the continent, and also looking directly in Southern Africa. So in terms of what has came out of the work and also of the previous discussions we had in the webinar around this work, it highlights that COVID-19 has affected malnutrition and also highlighted the importance of sound nutrition in the world. There's also a need to transform food systems in terms of to make sure that they address the issue of food security, improved nutrition, and access to affordable, healthy diets for the population. It also highlights that there is a need for a coordinated approach in each of these countries and in the continent, to making sure that we are building equitable, resilient, and better food systems that addresses the food nutrition needs for all. It also highlights that there should be efforts to empower rural communities in Southern Africa in order to make sure that they are able to produce according to their food security needs and food nutrition needs, and that we are able to unlock potential in rural areas in terms of their capability to produce food. It also highlights that government needs to create an enabling environment for working food systems for all. So it needs to create especially around policy and implementation of policy and investment into the sector, so as to make sure that the households are able to address the issues of working food systems, which address the needs for all. Furthermore, it also what has also been highlighted is that there is a link between climate change and nutrition. The link between climate change and nutrition has become very much important into making sure that we are able to address the issue of food security needs for all. There's also a need to invest in the participation of youth and women in food systems, so as to make sure, especially for youth, so as to make sure that we are able to develop food systems further even more, to make sure that we address the food security needs and nutrition needs for the future. There's also a need to think around the development of the issue of around development planning and food systems. So as we urbanize, how do we make sure that our food systems are also able to address for the food security needs for all, as more and more countries look towards urbanization in Southern Africa. There's also a need to look at the development of energy capabilities of Southern Africa, especially to make sure that they address the food system needs for all these issues, this being issues of around making sure that there's capable infrastructure to supply the energy requirements for the food system, and also making sure that it addresses the issues of food security and food nutrition around the food systems. So colleagues, this was my last slide, and a special thanks to Prof. Tim Richard King, Prof. Shirley Hendricks, Dr. Oswami, and Mr. Haley for contributing to this work. So some of this work will also be outlined in detail in the upcoming releases of Chatham House around expert comments, which will be coming out of this work, which has been conducted over the past few months around food systems in Southern Africa. In that brief presentation, colleagues, I thank you.
Thank you, Ndumiso. A brief presentation, but an awful lot of ground covered, so thank you. Agatha, you mentioned that you are about to launch a learning alliance in Muheza. I'm just wondering, of the challenges that you listed and sort of some of the best practices, I wonder what have been sort of some of the most practical challenges in your experience over the past few months in kind of getting that learning alliance off the ground. Do you have any insights from Muheza specifically, and sort of how those general lessons apply in that particular context?
Yes, thank you, Richard, for that question. Yes, looking at the learning alliances that are operating right now and looking at the challenges that those learning alliances have faced. First of all, when I was at the Chatham House, I had an opportunity to do a literature review, looking at how other learning alliances all over the world have been operating and what challenges have been facing so far. So if you look at the learning alliances, most of them major challenges have been fund, and how we have planned to address this is that we will, because most of the learning alliances that were established were working as under their own. So what we'll do at the newly learning alliance that is to be established is to make it part of the leaders at the district level. So district planning officer at the district level will be part of the team of the Learning Alliance. So instead of relying on donor, so the government will own the whole process of establishing a Learning Alliance through its government officials who will be part of the team in establishing the Learning Alliance. So we hope that the government will see the good things that come out of the Learning Alliance and support it and make it part of its day-to-day activity of the nation. And for instance, there was a Learning Alliance that was established in Uganda. So through district officers, so when the fund, when donor, because normally when the project phase out, the whole process is left to the leaders to take up. So most of the leaders who were coordinating the Learning Alliance in Uganda came from government officers. So it was really easy for them to own it and make it part of the government activity, and it is now mainstreamed in their processes of influencing policy as well as strategies. So that's the plan that we have here in Tanzania. The Learning Alliance, mostly leaders will come from the government officers, and it will be made part of the national processes, and it will be basically owned by those government leaders. So it will be really easy for them to at least reduce the process of depending on donors, since there will be a budget that is set from government to support Learning Alliance. So if it continues to operate well, so anyone could come in and support it. So basically they will have their own funds. And also we plan to have more often capacity building activities in terms of enhancing their capacities to have new ideas and on how to develop their own fund.
Press on with some questions we've got in the Q&A. So Marcelin Mayhop is asking Ndumiso about the shortcomings of policies and how they're not delivering for the food system in the Southern Africa region. And Marcelin's question is whether if you can comment whether that's about a lack of policies and absence of policies, or whether the current policies are inappropriate or they're not being implemented. Yeah, can you just say a bit about that, sorry, Ndumiso?
Okay, yes, so if you look currently in most of the countries in Southern Africa and in the continent, they've got good policies which are well written and well captured. However, the main issue comes around implementation, in saying how do we then implement those policies which are well captured to making sure that they work towards the intended development. And also the issue of a coordinated approach into implementation of that those policies, where you don't only say government becomes responsible for implementation of those policies, where you also bring together your civil society, your issues of around the private sector, and making sure that as you implement those policies, they are able to make sure that they work towards addressing the issue of what they are intended for. So I can say it's mainly the issue of implementation of those policies.
Thank you. I think we may have Sindiso back with us now. Can we hear you?
Yes. Now, can I make some quick comments, because there appears to be a network problem here. The first comment which I want to make is that on learning alliances, that I get the impression, rightly or wrongly, that these learning alliances are about policymakers. And yet when we talk about climate change and adaptation, it is not the policymakers really who are key in getting the results, but it's the farmers, whether they are smallholder farmers or big farmers, that is critical. So that's the first point I want to make, to say that I find it interesting that it is not those who are actually practitioners who are saying that. I'm saying this against the background of a famous Chinese saying, but if you want to teach, if you teach a man or a person to fish, they'll be able to feed themselves for the rest of their life. But if you give a man a fish or a person a fish, they'll then depend on you. And perhaps this explains why Agatha is saying that these learning alliances have challenges of funding, because if there are learning alliances at the right level of the farmers, the practitioners, then they will be able to sustain themselves because the farmer is driven by the profit motive. They'll be able to adopt and adapt the right agricultural practices, the technologies, etc., based on the benefits that they derive from that. But I don't see that happening with respect to the policymakers, because they are not the ones who are the practitioners. That's the first point on learning alliances. The second point I also want to address is that it is not clear what the objective of these learning alliances are, because if one looks at the presentation that we made, I'm not seeing anything that says what is it that we can, as part of evidence, demonstrate that climate resilient agricultural practices, that innovation contributes to improved yields, to improved food security. I also want to say here that there is a difference between food security and nutrition security, because these are two different things. You can have food security, but you don't have nutrition security, in the sense that even when people are food secure, if their nutrition is not the right one, they will still not be able to have nutrition security. And this explains why you may have people who have got food security, but they are still having nutrition insecurity, stunted growth, and things like that. And perhaps we can also learn lessons of what China has done, where they've got a specific program on nutrition, security from the time the child is born up to the age of 5, for the very simple reason that if you don't address that, the 21st century, the computation is not going to be, it's going to be with respect to brains, to the brain power. Now, regarding the other comment, the other presentation by Ndumiso, I cannot say that what he has presented is not correct. But again, what is missing in all these presentations is that we are not really linking or producing evidence in terms of what has happened with those farmers or cohorts of those farmers that are practicing adaptation, that are mitigation, etc. Are they having better yields than the others? Are they able to withstand the climate shocks that we are talking about better than those who are not doing it? And I would suggest here that perhaps what needs to be done is to do what in the medical profession they do. And I would have wished to see this happening in these presentations, where you say you've got the randomized trial groups. Those are the people who are practicing climate resilient agriculture practices, and those who are not. And then you compare them and say, who is better placed to do that? Because without that evidence, it is really very difficult for one to meaningfully contribute to these policies. I get the impression that, yes, they are okay in terms of being peer reviewed and things like that. But agriculture and the issue of food security is more than the issue of peer review. It's a question of, are we really having the agricultural practices or in terms of innovation? How is that innovation being done? And let me, before I conclude here, because I don't want to take your time, indicate that farmers normally, the way the learning process takes place is if you have a farmer who introduces new practices and they see the benefits from that farmer, they will all imitate that farmer. That farmer becomes the lead innovator, the lead practitioner. Of course, you'll also have laggards within those communities that will not do anything. So I think we need to go back to basics and say, for whom are we having these learning alliances? For whom are we having these policies? Because see, these policies are for the people, and they must be owned by the people in order for them to be sustained. And the farmers will do that. Experience has shown that they'll be able to, to have sustainability. But I get the impression that we are still dealing at the macro level, not at micro level, not at level where the execution, takes place. I thought I should just make those comments with respect to the presentations. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Certainly worth the wait, and some very provocative thoughts there. I want to give Agatha and Ndumiso the chance to respond directly to anything that particularly stood out to them. Agatha, any thoughts?
Thank you very much, Honorable Ngwenya. I would say your reflection has come at quite a real good time when we are about to establish a new learning alliance, and we would not like to make the same mistake. So I've taken in your advice, and as the way a learning alliance is designed is that there will be those practitioners with ideas, as well as local farmers who will be part of the learning alliance, for them to learn from the practitioner and practice at their local level, and also influence other farmers who are not part of the learning alliance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ngwenya. Yes, no, I think what you highlighted is very much important, of saying how do we now move from the macro level to the micro level in these discussions. I can think of the project that we are all here because of the AFRICAP project, where it's mainly on the ground looking at saying how do we build evidence-based research towards making sure that we address issues of climate change and policy. If I can make an example of where we also did a comparison when we did our household survey for AFRICAP, where in the Free State, we looked at farmers which are already practicing in some form or way of saying how do they mitigate toward around issues of climate change, where they were highlighting that they were impacted by climate change over the years, especially your crop and livestock farmers. In some of those were already implementing some of the recommendations which came from previous studies in saying how can they address the issue of climate change on the ground. And we saw those that some of those which indicated that they had stopped even planting and still thinking of the way forward in terms of what crops to consider, because they weren't practicing mitigation strategies around climate change. So I can indicate that there is some evidence on the ground which can help to address some of the questions which are more of a micro scale, and saying what impact is climate change having on farmers, and how the ones which are practicing mitigation strategies are coping in comparison with those which are still producing normally and not addressing the issue of mitigation and resilience around climate change.
Richard, just before I exit this group, because I may not be here for long, I just want to make one comment, which perhaps I should have made, to say that I get really puzzled, because when you look at adaptation and mitigation historically, you'll find that communities have got their own ways and means of doing this. They practice it. But what I notice here is that we are not building on those community practices in different environments, because they do it most of the time. They even when it comes to the crops that they are going to plant, they'll be able to plant those crops that will withstand the different seasons. And the way they used to do it in an African setting is not using all these satellite forecasts and things like that. They will simply look at the kind of pests that you have, the kind of birds that you have, the kind of vegetation that springs, and they'll be able to tell you that, yes, it's going to be a good year or not a good year. And they'll be able to say, we are not going to do what we have done in the years where we've got plenty of rain, etc. The point I'm making here is that we need to build on what already communities are practicing on the ground. And that, if there is any research that needs to do that, we need to collect that evidence and say, how can we then have that upscaled? How can it be improved? How can we bring the other practices from other regions in the world in order to improve that? But we should not be thinking that we are starting from scratch in terms of climate change or the adaptation and mitigation, because this has been there. They have not been using these concepts, but they've been practicing adaptation and mitigation for some time. But what we now need to do, because we are living in a new world of bigger challenges in terms of climate change, what we need to do now is to say, how can we then bring about innovation upscale, these practices. It's always better to build on what people know and not bring something from outside which they will not be able to relate to, especially the farmers, because the farmers are very skeptical when you go to them and tell them this is what is going to be good for you. But the farmers will always do what they see the other farmer, practicing. Because when they see the results, they'll do that. The other thing I want to mention just before I close is to say that I noticed that the way we are talking about agriculture, food systems, etc., we're not talking about as business. It's high time we begin to say it should be part of business. It should be part of the, production of the value chain, because as long as we look at it as something for food security, etc., then we are missing the point that we are not going to get people to innovate, to do adaptation, to do mitigation. Because when they do it as part of business, which creates wealth for them, etc., it becomes a new dynamic. So I just wanted to make those comments, Richard, and I thank you for inviting me as a discussant.
Thank you very
I'll
much.
listen to the further comments. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, two very good points. And I think certainly they are both embedded within the objectives of the way that AFRICAP programme is operating, but it will be for others to judge whether or not we are successful on that front. But I wonder, Agatha, just on that point about learning from what farmers are already doing, you presented the hierarchy of learning alliances and sort of from the global level down to the national to the regional. I wonder what your reflections are on the opportunity for the hierarchy to work the other way as well. So what are the opportunities to learn from one local learning alliance to another, or to take those lessons from the very small community organisations up into the more national and international learning alliance structures? Any reflections on that?
Yes, thank you, Richard. I think right now in that hierarchy order, we do not have any other learning alliance at the local level. So what I could say is, looking right now, we have at Tanzania, we have the subnational learning alliances. We have 3 in total at the whole country, and most of them are based at Tanga and in Morogoro and Kilosa. So looking at what has been practiced at the 3 learning alliances and the one that will be established soon, that will be the 4th learning alliance, it will be an opportunity for, at a ward level, to at least start their learning alliance, and that will make a real meaningful because farmers are based at the ward and village level. So if learning alliances are established at the local level, it will be an opportunity for farmers to directly engage at their local level and make an impactful because what is practiced at the local level and will be adapted at the subnational as well as national and the whole country. So if the learning alliance is at the local level, it will be really easy to influence policy and the strategies of what is to be practiced and how the climate smart agriculture can be upscaled from all levels. Thank you.
Thank you. And just finally, before we go back to the audience Q&A, Ndumiso, on the business case, I imagine that's something that you at the National Agricultural Marketing Council think a lot about in terms of, sort of the business practices around some of this and the need for profitability. Any reflections on that point?
Yes, no, definitely. It's something which we are always advocating for, that agriculture at the end of the day, it's like any business. So with whatever resources you invest into it, it should be the issue of making sure that it's profitable and you are able to also feed the nations and the nation and also around that. So in some of the work that we do, we work closely with the private sector in making sure that they are able to work closely with the farmers on, especially your small scale farmers, in making sure that they're able to upscale them into a commercial basis where the farmers now understand that it's not an issue of around farming for your own household food security, but making sure that you are able to generate income for yourself, and also making sure that you are able to feed the nation and those around you. So we look a lot with the commercial guys or the private sector and saying, how do they assist your small scale farmers, especially around your enterprise development, where if a farmer is now able to have inputs which make sure that he or she is able to increase her productivity. He or she also has access to issues of around extension services, issues of around research, which is already coming out from your private sector, and making sure that they're able to implement that on the ground and then and becoming profitable and generating income from that. And also, there's also a lot of training which is also done by the private sector and also government together with some of those farmers in making sure that they are able to increase their productivity and make sure that they are able to see their business making income and seeing farming as a business rather than as a hobby or something which only addresses food security for their own household. So there's a lot of work which is currently being done by the private sector, working together with us in some funding instruments which they mainly implementing through discussions and coordination with government in the country.
Great, thank you. There's a question that's been asked by Louise Crow, reflecting on the point that you made, Ndumiso, about the necessity of participation of women and youth in food systems. And I guess that's proactive participation as well as just being involved in the system. Well, then I think, Ndumiso, as you raised it, it falls to you. Any suggestions as to how we make that happen? I mean, I think everyone understands it's a desirable goal, but what can we do practically? Yes,
no, I think the participation of youth and women in the sector in agriculture and food systems is very much important. Looking at the fact that if we are looking, especially around youth, if we are looking for those which will feed the countries or the nations, that skill and business approach should come from youth. Because if you look at the average age of farmers, especially in a number of countries, I can make an example here. Lately, it's say you are looking at an average age of about above 55, above 60. So it shows that there's really a need for government and working together with a number of stakeholders to create packages which aim to support youth participating in the agricultural sector, because that's where the future of the sector lies. And we know that in terms of our youth, that's where most of the capabilities to adopt into technology and innovation lies. So creating that attractiveness of agriculture, as most of the youth say being sexy, is what is required to making sure that youth participate in the sector, because that's where the future lies. So it's all up to saying, how do we create those policies, those packages which attract youth, and making sure that youth understand that at the end of the day, agriculture is about making money and making sure that agriculture is just as profitable as any other business which youth can consider going into. Especially also, if you look at the issue of women in most of these countries, women have mainly been left to do issues of around subsistence agriculture. And as Honorable Ngwenya highlighted, there's also a lot of indigenous knowledge lying with women in agriculture in the continent. So if we work towards investing in that and elevating it, definitely the importance of women in the sector can be highlighted in making sure that we also able to address the issue of food security in the future, with youth and women participation in the sector. So it also addresses the issues of making sure that we balance the issue of not agriculture being seen only as something which is done by men who are mainly very much older, but also making sure that we attract to youth and women in this, and making sure that they're also able to tackle the issue of innovation in the sector.
Great, yes, and in the chat, Francis Hale has just made a good point that we perhaps need to be thinking about the whole value chain and the opportunities to engage across the food value chain to attract youth, rather than just thinking about the on-farm work of agriculture, which I think is a good point. There's a question from Maureen Chittendu, who's recognising that the goals of zero hunger by 2030 may not be attainable in many countries, not least because of climate change, but now it looks like COVID has also set us back. And I think what Maureen's question is getting at is, in some senses, if those goals have gone, should we still be thinking about the 2030 target, or should we be thinking about how we position ourselves beyond 2030 for the long term? Obviously, a lot of activity on the continent is framed in the context of 2063. And so I wonder if Ndumiso, if you have any reflections on that, and then I'll come to you, Agatha, on the same question. So should we still be looking at 2030, or do we need to be thinking longer term?
No, I think we definitely should be looking at rebuilding beyond 2030. So looking at saying, how do we develop a coordinated approach to make sure we look at the blind spot which we missed over the years, in making sure that we are able to build resilient food systems which are able to address the issue of food security and nutrition for the needs of the population. So we should be definitely looking beyond. So I can also touch on the work that is being done around AFRICAP, where even on the modeling component for which is being done around AFRICAP, it's looking in the future where we're saying how will climate change impact production by 2050. So I think having a futuristic approach is very much important, and not just looking at saying, how can we quickly reach the issue of zero hunger by 2030, looking at the fact that because of climate change, because of the recent pandemic, and also because of other issues of not being able to invest more into agriculture and implementing some of the policies which have been developed over the years, this has impacted on us reaching that. So as we rebuild and making sure that we build resilient food systems, we need to look beyond that and come together as all the stakeholders which need to be involved in the sector in making sure that they are able to address that and making sure that we able to meet our food security and nutrition needs as the continent and also as the world, looking at other regions.
Yeah, thank you. Agatha, same question, but I know I'm aware that you've also been looking at the impact of COVID on food security in Tanzania. So any reflections either on sort of the immediate COVID impacts within your country or on that broader time horizon question?
Yes, looking at the impact of COVID-19 to food security in Tanzania, mostly there were no records or research activities that were done on such issues due to the fact that Tanzania at the time did not take COVID-19 as a problem by then. But there are a few studies that were conducted, and they mostly were on impact on cross-border trade. That is how neighboring countries are impacted by COVID-19 and how food system is impacted by the whole process. And mainly the impact we are seeing on the fact that Tanzania did not go under lockdown, but most of the neighboring countries went to lockdown. So there was a major drop on prices for food crops, and mostly women were impacted by such drop prices because mostly of cross borders from Tanzania who do business with neighboring countries are women. About 80% of the cross borders are women, and we had a talk with them, and most of them were impacted by that. It went on impacting also their social life, and their marriages were at risk. So the impact were really felt to women, and the food that was present by then at Tanzania could not be sold in any other neighboring countries, but rather within the country. So the prices went down for food, and the farmers were. Okay, so what I was saying is that women are the ones who were largely impacted by COVID-19 because most of them, about 80% of those who are dealing with business or dealing with selling agricultural crops to the neighboring countries are women. So women and youth were largely impacted, and that went on impacting their social life. To those who were married, their marriages went away because they are the ones who were running families. So COVID-19 has really been a challenge in our country, but we thank God right now, at least the borders are open and farmers can still do business with neighboring countries as it used to be.
Great, thank you. We're coming up on time, so if anyone has any last minute burning questions, please do enter it in the chat. But if not, I've got one final question to Ndumiso about the point that Sindiso was making around the difference between the affordability of food security and nutrition security, and the point that you noted that the affordability of healthy diets was going down in Southern Africa. And I can understand that there have been income shocks from COVID, and therefore people may have less income, but it looked like the absolute cost had gone up as well as the affordability based on people's incomes going down. So I just wondered if you had any insights as to what was driving prices of healthy diets higher in the last year, as opposed to people just losing their income.
Yes, no. I think if you look at that issue, it's mainly issues of around. If you in economics, you normally call it supply and demand, where if there's not enough supply of food, that will then drive the issue of prices up. And also if you look at some of, we've tended to also shift now over the years in some of the countries in the continent where we are now also relying on importing some of this food, of the staple food which is required, where then because of not having enough supply, that also drives the issue of the prices of that particular product up. So it also goes back to saying, as the continent, we need to make sure that we produce sufficiently in terms of the staple food that we require in order to meet the current demand of the population. That will then address the issue of the prices of increasing over time. And also, if you look at some of these food that we produce, the staple food that we produce, I can make an example, let's say, of maize. We rely a lot on importing some of the inputs like your fertilizers, your issues of machinery which goes into the production of that. So that also tends to push up the price of those food, because as a farmer and as a business person, I need also to make sure that I cover my overhead costs which went into production of that particular product. So we need to push households to be able to localize production in order to make sure that we are able to produce more food, which becomes easily more accessible to households which are in those areas. So looking around issues of localization and producing more food can assist in driving some of the prices of those particular products down, and also being able to make sure that we are able to feed ourselves as the continent.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think that's time. So it just remains for me to thank Ndumiso and Agatha, not just for today, which has covered an awful lot of ground, but also for being with us for the last 6 months at Chatham House. So thank you very much for your time. And I think everyone here will appreciate how wide-ranging the ground that you've covered is. Thanks also to Honourable Ngwenya, who's had to drop off, but particularly thanks for him bearing with us through the technical issues. That is the end of this series now, so thank you for attending today, and if people have been to previous ones, thank you very much for sticking with us over the previous years. As ever, presentations will be shared, and if anyone would like to sign up to the mailing list, there is a link in the chat. But for now, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.